Pastor Diane, the children's pastor here at Thrive, as Andy shared with you. And I am excited. Over in kids' church, we call this big church. So I told the kids last week, I won't be with you next week because I'll be in the big church. And I'm excited, super psyched to be a grown-up with you guys today. We have been in a series called Rooted. And we've been talking about these encounters that people have had where, not encounters with trees. Trees have been involved in these encounters, but the encounters have really been with God and with Jesus. But some kind of tree has been involved in these stories. And I love the bottom line of this series where it says, grow deep and live strong. I actually came to faith as a young child. And so kind of a picture of me as a walking, talking Jesus tree. That back then when I was a kid, maybe one of those twigs that you know is going to grow into a tree, but not very strong, just kind of skinny, but like firmly planted. Ready to grow. And so fast forward to now, walking, talking Jesus tree, much thicker in the trunk, as trees tend to get, right? Sadly. But I'm firmly rooted in faith and a person kind of just doing my best to live for Jesus. I'm actually not the tree, though, that I came here to talk about. There isn't actually a tree that we'll be discussing today. Right now, today, in the city of Jericho, there is a tree that's more than 2,000 years old. They've taken and dated it, and it's a big tree at the edge of kind of a grassy park. It's surrounded by a fence, and people right now go to Jericho to see this tree, to look at this tree. Even today, the tree is a sycamore fig tree. I don't know if you've been in church as long as I have and you hear sycamore tree, it might be ringing a little bell for you. But if not, if you're confused about why people go to see this sycamore tree, out of all of the trees that there are in Jericho, there's a little plaque next to it that explains why. And it's because this tree, they say, is the very one. It's more than 2,000 years old, and who knows if that's true. But it helps you experience something. There's a story in the Bible about a man named Zacchaeus. And he met Jesus in a really unique way. His encounter with Jesus was really unique. He started his day that day when he met Jesus as an outcast, a sinner. He was searching for truth. And he ended it as a believer. He was restored to community and he was found. So I'm excited to share that story with you today. So we've come to a part of the service that I was a little bit nervous about. I want to get this right. So I want to share the story with you. So Thrive, we're going to open our Bibles. That's so exciting. We're going to open it to Luke chapter 19. You can actually only find the story of Zacchaeus in the book of Luke. And it's in chapter 19. And I'm going to go ahead and read the whole story because it's actually not a very long one. It's just 10 verses. So Luke chapter 19, we're going to read verses 1 through 10. Let's go ahead and read it together now. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and made his way through the town. There was a man there named Zacchaeus. He was one of the most influential Jews in the Roman tax collecting business, and he had become very rich. He tried to get a look at Jesus, but he was too short to see over the crowds. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree beside the road so he could watch from there. And when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down, for I must be a guest in your home today. Zacchaeus quickly climbed down and took Jesus into his house in great excitement and joy. But the crowds were displeased. He has gone to be the guest of a notorious sinner. They grumbled. Don't they grumble? Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord. And if I've overcharged people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much. And Jesus responded, salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a son of Abraham. And I, the Son of Man, have come to seek and save those who are lost. So I'm going to be honest with you. I originally passed on the story of the sycamore tree when Andy came and shared a series. We're going to do this series called Rooted, Pastor Andy and Pastor Sally. So we're going to do this series called Rooted. And here's a list of trees that we said there's these encounters that happened. And would you like to do one? And at the time I was like, yeah, I want to do one. And now I'm like, What was I thinking? But no, but I said, yeah, I do. And I think my direct quote when I saw sycamore on the list, I was like, I'm definitely not going to do Zacchaeus in the sycamore tree. I was like, what would I even talk about? I think in my whole life, I've only ever heard this story taught in kids' church. I learned it as a child, and there's a cute little song that goes with it. What I knew about Zacchaeus, wee little man, climbed a tree, had lunch with Jesus. That's what I knew, And I'd never heard it taught outside of kids' church in my whole life. So I really didn't know what I would talk about, but I took a look at the story anyway. And actually, the more I read it and kind of just said, is there more here? I realized, yeah, actually, it's not just a silly little story. It's actually a beautiful story of grace and faith and redemption. And I'm now excited to share this story with you today. So Zacchaeus was a Jew. He was living in Jericho with his fellow Israelites. He was living with them, but definitely not among them. We know in our story that he was a tax collector. And tax collectors back in Jesus' day were absolutely hated by the Jews. Not that we loved the IRS or anything like that, but they were hated, absolutely reviled. They were actually seen as collaborators against their fellow countrymen, kind of cooperating with their Roman occupiers, because the taxes that were collected, they didn't stay in the community. They were just sent to Rome. And so tax collectors were perceived as working against their fellow Jews. And not only that, but they were perceived as really greedy. Because often what they decided to do was they would collect more taxes than what they actually owed. And they would keep the difference for themselves and amass great personal wealth from their fellow countrymen. And so for their greed, they were considered sinners. They were outcasts. They were not really considered worthy to be in association with. So what we know about Zacchaeus, he was not only a tax collector, he was the chief tax collector. He was the main bad guy, I guess. Jericho actually had a really lucrative trade in this production and export of balsam, which is like a sticky, fragrant substance. It's actually the only place in the region you could get it. And so it was actually a very wealthy community. And as they produced and exported this, taxes were collected, lots of opportunities to skin them off the top. And so he was a man who was very rich, and so he was very despised. And it seems to me, at least at this point, Zacchaeus was a man that was driven by his external circumstances. Someone who wanted money, and he cared more about that money and getting it than just about anything else. At least up until now, this encounter that he was about to have. A change was going to happen for him that day. Because a man named Jesus was going to be passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. And there had been a lot of notoriety building up around Jesus during this time. There was all this word of things that he had done and these miracles and deeds. And so there was a lot of buzz around him. And no matter where he went, great crowds would come to say, they wanted to say, who is this guy? Have you heard who he said he is? It's pretty controversial. And so we want to see him. We want to see if he's the real deal. So a lot of buzz, and these crowds came. And then something different stirred in Zacchaeus that day. And I don't know, maybe pure curiosity just drove him into the crowd. Or maybe there was just an awakening that there was something beyond his external circumstances. He maybe became aware of the state of his internal condition, a change that he needed to make in his life. And whatever it was, he was about to go to some pretty extraordinary lengths to see Jesus. And so I've already talked more about Zacchaeus than I actually thought possible. But I think one of the first things that I found in this story when I said, yeah, there's more here, I think the first thing I want to share from the story is that external circumstances don't matter as much as your internal condition. So again, Zacchaeus was a man who seemed to be driven by these external, by amassing wealth. And I'm not sure our culture, it's not very different today. And we seem to spend a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of energy curating our outside appearance, how we appear to other people, how we present ourselves even online. As a matter of fact, this past year, there was an announcement from a really popular dating app. They said they were going to start instituting height verifications on their profiles. And everybody was like, oh my gosh, this is what we've been waiting for. You know what I mean? They were really excited. They're like, finally I can know exactly how tall someone is before I consider spending time with them. And it's amazing that it's something that people lie about on a consistent enough basis that like an announcement about it would be like, oh yeah, great, yeah, we've needed that. You know what I mean? As if something as arbitrary as a person's stature can actually measure their worth. And anyway, it turns out it was a joke. The announcement had been made on April 1st. It was an April Fool's Day joke. Yeah, everybody's checking their profiles right now, I know. No, but the initial overwhelming positive support for this feature was actually kind of crazy, you know? Because what's on the outside, it really doesn't matter. And oftentimes what's going on the outside, it's not even a true reflection about what actually is happening internally. It's a false front. And ultimately what's happening internally is what's actually important. And the Bible is very clear about which one is more important. There are 66 books in the Bible, and those 66 books have 1,189 chapters, approximately 738,000 words in the Bible. Not very many describe what people look like. We actually don't even know what Jesus looks like, the most important human on earth. A physical description doesn't exist of him anywhere. And that's because God always elevates, always prizes our internal condition over what's happening to us on the outside. I think he must have known, as our Creator, we might develop this tendency to value a person's worth by how they look and how they appear. And maybe that if we knew what Jesus looked like, we would come to prize his features more than any others, or mold ourselves to what he looks like. And we would maybe come to worship an ideal of Jesus rather than Jesus himself. And so the Bible tells us everything we know about Jesus. We know him so well from the Bible. We don't know what he looks like, but we know about his love for us. We know about his compassion for the lost. We know about the wisdom he shared about how we need to live our lives. We know everything we know about Jesus is from the Bible. We don't know what he looks like. It doesn't matter. And Zacchaeus was one of the very few people, maybe two in the Bible, that there's a physical description given. So Luke has already shared with us that what we know about him is that he's very rich. The only other thing we know about Zacchaeus is that he was very short. And I don't know if height was as prized a feature back then as it turns out it is in 2021. But Luke wanted us to know this thing. He said, you need to know he was very short. And I think he included this fact. We had to have some context for what was about to happen. Zacchaeus wanted to see Jesus. He had this yearning just for a glimpse, but the crowd prevented it. He was too short to see over them. So he ran ahead and he climbed a sycamore tree so that he could get just a quick peek of Jesus as he passed by. He had this internal yearning, a drive to see Jesus. He was willing to do whatever he needed to do to overcome his external limitations to make that happen. And that happens in our life right now all the time. It's still happening to us today. How often is Jesus crowded out of our life by family, by friends, by coworkers, by culture? We tend to start deciding, I want to pay attention to what's more popular or what's trending or whatever else, and it obscures the truth of Jesus. It crowds him out. Obligation crowds in. Life crowds in. And it's up to us to do whatever it takes to push through, to keep our eyes and our hearts and our lives focused on him, to stay rooted in the truth. And I love what happens next in this story. This is a key. Don't miss it. Zacchaeus was most likely expecting Jesus just to pass by. Again, he was just going to climb the tree just to get a peek of him as he passed by. That's not what happened. Jesus stopped. Jesus recognized the need that Zacchaeus had to know him and to see him. And maybe Jesus even recognized the humility it would have taken for a grown man to climb a tree just to get a peek, because that would have been really unusual during that time. So Jesus recognized this and he stopped. And then we see In Luke 19:5, it says, when Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and he called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down, for I must be a guest at your house today. There's an urgency in the words that Jesus spoke. It matches that urgency that Zacchaeus had in climbing the sycamore tree. Quick, come down. I must be a guest at your house today. I just love that Jesus matched that energy in Zacchaeus. And I love that illustrates a truth that we can know today. If there is any yearning in your heart to know Jesus or to get closer to him, you will find him. Because when you seek Jesus, Jesus always reaches back for you. He's going to call you out of whatever external circumstance you find yourself in. If you're lost in life right now, if you're up a tree, if you're outcast, if you're wondering if there's someone who can help you, Jesus can. More importantly, I'm going to tell you, Jesus will. This past week, I had a meeting with one of my clients. Monday through Friday, I'm a financial advisor. And so I call my clients in, we take a look at their portfolios, and I give them an update. I start the meeting as I always do. I just say, hey, how are you? How have you been? How are you doing? And she shares, she's like, oh, I have been through something so intense this past week. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Tell me more. You know what I mean? I'm so curious. She's like, okay, so this past month, I've been letting some resentments build up in my life. I just feel like my family doesn't appreciate me. My friends, they don't value me. And so I'm feeling just isolated. And I had all this resentment building up inside of me and kind of anger. And I felt like I was at odds with everyone in my life. And she said, in this past week, it just kind of blew up. I just realized I'm fighting with everyone. And she's like, I don't know what's going on. So she said she decided to stop and take a look at what was going on inside of her. And what she realized was she had all these expectations of people. And when they would fail her expectations, she would want them to be here and they would come in here. And she was like, she was nursing all these little fires of resentment and all these little grudges, right? And people are against me and they don't like me and nobody loves me. And all of a sudden, all those little fires, they blew up into one giant fire. She's fighting with everybody in her life. She's miserable. No one's talking to anybody. And she's like, it's me. I'm doing that. It's the resentment in my life. It's not them. I'm doing that. She said, I let it build up too big, and all of a sudden, I have this bonfire, and it's crowded out everything. And she said, as soon as I had the realization, I had a new realization. I can't do anything about it. It got to be too big. She said, I didn't even know where to start. What do I do next? She said the only thing she could think to do was pray. Oh, I'm going back there. She was crying. I was crying. She said the only thing I could think of to do was pray. I had to tell God and Jesus, I can't fight this fight. It's too big. It's gotten too big for me. I don't even know what to do. And she said in that moment, there was just a release in her heart. And she said that this intense time that she's had this past week has just been a time of her heart changing. There's just been a cleansing. She said, I've been crying every day. She said, I was crying tears of remorse for my actions. I was crying tears of relief that I didn't have to do it alone, that there was someone I could call on that could help me, and tears of joy that I was going to move from this place. My client, she was in a bad place. But she called out to Jesus from where she was. I can't do it alone. And Jesus was there, and he was going to move her from that place. And she wasn't underappreciated, and she wasn't undervalued. She was loved. She was valued. She has Jesus. She reached out to him, and he reached back. We actually didn't even talk about her accounts that day because I think that we both knew that external stuff that day, it didn't matter. Because what was happening with her internally was more important to talk about. We knew the appointment that we had was to help her and for me to encourage her. Just like Jesus wasn't just passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. Jesus was there to meet Zacchaeus. And this interaction that Jesus had with Zacchaeus, it scandalizes the onlooking crowd. I mean, they know Zacchaeus is a sinner. He's an outcast. Don't you know what he's done? He's not only short in stature, he's short in moral standing. He cheats us. He's greedy. How could you want to eat with him? How could you want to honor him with your presence? But they were only seeing the outside. To them, Zacchaeus didn't look any different than he had the day before. But his internal condition, as always, is more important than what's happening externally. In his heart, Zacchaeus wanted to meet the Messiah. And the Messiah wanted to meet Zacchaeus just as much. And he wants to meet you too. Whatever it takes. I mean, wherever you're at in life, take that first small step to get closer to Jesus. If you take that small step to meet him, read about him in the Bible, get to know him through his word and through prayer. Talk with others about him. If there's questions on your heart, ask all the questions that you have. It's okay. He'll move forward and meet you where you are. Trust that Jesus will meet you, and you're going to experience an internal realignment so profound that it changes everything. And that's what happens next in our story of Zacchaeus. He had this internal realignment that changed. So Jesus went with Zacchaeus. I'm going to continue on the story. To his home, despite the dismay of the crowds, and they were standing around complaining. And then Zacchaeus stands up, and he just starts giving all his money away. Let's look at that, Luke 19, 8 through 10. Let's read it again. It says, "Meanwhile, Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, 'I will give half my wealth to the poor, Lord, and if I've overcharged people on their taxes, I will give them back 4 times as much.' And Jesus responded, 'Salvation has come to this home today, for this man has shown himself to be a son of Abraham. And I, the Son of Man, have come to seek and save those who are lost.'" So this brief encounter with Jesus completely changed Zacchaeus' mindset. I mean, he was rich. He had all this money from tax collecting and cheating at tax collecting. And I have to think that he placed a very high value on his net worth, something that I actually have a lot of experience with. I sit down with people. I know how much value they put on the dollars on their statement. So I know where he was at. But that, for him, was all that he had. He was hated by his community. He didn't have much else to do or participate in or find self-worth in. Just his money and getting more money and holding on tight to his money. It makes me feel safe. This is mine. It's all I have until Jesus. And after this meeting with Jesus, he realized there's more to existence than just existing and getting through life. And the shift is so dramatic. I feel like Zacchaeus had this epiphany of the eternal, of eternity. And that there was a sudden flash of understanding that whatever he had gathered, it wasn't going to last. Didn't matter how much he had. That he had found something greater, something stronger than his money to find worth in. And he didn't need the money anymore. There were people who did need it, so he just gave half of it away, just like, here's half to the poor. As freely as I received Jesus, I'm going to freely give. He could take part in his community. Now he can make a positive difference in it. And the epiphany brought the realization that he actually was a sinner. I mean, they called him that before. Maybe it didn't matter to him before. But now he had this realization, they're right. I am a sinner. But Jesus found me. I don't have to stay that way. Now I can make things right. Zacchaeus decides he's going to go ahead and give 4 times the amount that he took. If he cheated, he was going to give back 4 times as much. The money didn't matter anymore. He had this realization, it's just temporary. What I found was I found something eternal. I found salvation. And I stop here. When I read it, I get to this point, and it brings to mind a story that happened not long before this interaction with Zacchaeus. If you look just one chapter back in Luke 18, there's a story of a man called the rich young ruler. Just one chapter ahead, we see a story of a person who's given the exact same opportunity from Jesus. This rich young ruler, he asked Jesus, "What do I have to do to have eternal life?" And Jesus responds, "Well, you know the commandments." He lists some of them. And the guy's like, "Yes, I know the commandments. I've been living it since I was a little tree. Been doing that from my youth." And Jesus said, "Okay, one thing you lack. You need to sell everything you own and give the money to the poor and follow me, and you will have treasures in heaven." So this person and Zacchaeus, very similar. Both of them had this intentional encounter with Jesus. Both of them were very rich. Zacchaeus, he accepted the Lord with excitement and joy into his home, and his life changed. Unfortunately, the rich young ruler, exact opposite response. He decided, I'm going to hold on to my money. And what does the Bible say? He went away sad because he was very rich. So two men, similar, rich men, encounter with Jesus, salvation. Zacchaeus, yes, Lord. The rich young ruler, no. It comes down, what's your response going to be? Zacchaeus, he chose to think from an eternal perspective. That's what Jesus said. Today, salvation has come. I'm going to pause because I don't want you to mistake what happens here. Jesus didn't say that Zacchaeus was saved because he gave away a lot of his money. Rather, the change in his heart was exhibited by this action. It was just a response to what was already happening in him. And Jesus was recognizing that. And Jesus didn't look at Zacchaeus and say, hey, look, good start, half of it. But I got to go with the deal I gave the last guy. You got to sell everything and give it away. It's all or nothing. No, he didn't say that either, because there's a recognition that Zacchaeus was freely acting out of obedience to this internal shift in perspective. The obedience we see in this passage is greater than the sacrifice. So I want you to hear me. It's not about the money. I mean, in the context of these two verses, I might think, I think God wants us all to be broke all the time. It's not that. It's that he wants us to be obedient. He wants us to reprioritize our lives. We need to put the eternal in front of the temporary. In the past, I've been very greedy about my time. Early in my more grown-up Christian days, there's a call to action or a conviction in my heart. I would almost always respond to it by throwing money at it. So if the kids need resources, or if we need to dig a well, or if the hungry need to be fed, take some money. Unlike the rich young ruler and Zacchaeus in his earlier days, I didn't feel a need to hold on tightly to my money. But my time was really not up for grabs. As I valued my free time, I prioritized it. I love reading books. I read a lot of books. I love watching movies. I like watching TV. I engage in pop culture. It's just something I like my free time to just kind of engage with books and movies and doing what I want. And so time and money, I thought, those are the same. And so I'd love to help from over here. And yet that response stopped feeling satisfying. There was a dissatisfaction that occurred. And I would write the check for whatever needed to happen, and then it would feel like the job was not yet done. And I realized, oh no, God wants some of my time. And then he wants me to get into the work. He wants me to get my hands dirty. And you know what? I mean, it wasn't easy. It's never easy to give up something they're holding on really tightly to, you know? But I did respond to that. I started to give a little bit of time in addition to a monetary gift. Or sometimes instead of a monetary gift, I would just give my time. And honestly, you guys, sometimes it's still just a monetary gift. Because sometimes things, they just need money. Youth man. Right? So but the important thing is I started to evaluate, I started to discern in each call to action, what is God requiring of me? And to do my best and to be obedient to what he wanted. And I've had experiences, and I've made memories, and I've been blessed by the work God was doing with my two hands. My time on earth, it's temporary. And I want to spend it doing as much as I can for the eternal kingdom. Our time is temporary. Our lives are so short when we think about eternity. Everything in this world, everything is temporary. And if we are not firmly rooted in Jesus Christ, we're going to find ourselves operating out of that spirit of dissatisfaction or sadness or fear. Because what we cling to, what we're holding on to is shifting and fleeting. It won't last. I can tell you about times in my life when the storms came and I was blowing all over the place. Let me tell you about when I first got married. Jared and I have been married now for 15 years, or this year for 15 years. Woo, but that first year was really hard. Something happened when we got married. Jared and I got married. We dated for a long time. We got married. And suddenly I was afraid. There was some stuff that happened in my family in the past. And I carried some of that fear baggage into my new marriage. And it was rough. I just knew all of a sudden, Jared's going to leave me someday. He's just going to leave me. And if he does, I'm going to be totally destroyed. I'm going to feel so worthless. I'm going to be so unlovable. And so I do pray in times of distress, and so I did pray, but my prayers were like this: God, please don't let Jared leave me. God, please don't let Jared leave me. God, please don't. I was holding on to him so tight, and it was a hard first year. But Jesus still got through. I mean, I reached out to Jesus with those silly, desperate prayers, and Jesus still reached back through it. And through his word, I remember he said, haven't I said, I will never leave you or forsake you? And I was like, yeah, Lord, you have said that. And he said, you have to trust in me. So Jared's a solid guy. I love him so much. But Jared is not Jesus Christ. He's not eternal. And I had to pick up that root that had accidentally buried in Jared Jones and fertilized in fear. I had to pick it up and I had to put it back in Jesus Christ. I stopped praying about my marriage. I started praying for my husband, that he would pursue Jesus first, that he would have a heart for Christ. So it's a hard first year, but here we are, year 15. Jared's here right now, serving Christ. I'm here right now, serving Christ. We have a heart, he has a heart for Christ. We're that strong cord of three. We are rooted in the eternal. And man, if this last year didn't teach us that everything is temporary, what a year. I mean, the world threw everything at us. As a society, we were challenged financially, we were challenged physically, politically, socially, academically, environmentally. The storm raged. The world threw everything at us. And I saw many of my friends and the people in my life were twisting in the storm, unrooted, full of fear and doubt. They had put their trust in things that were temporary, external. And this past year, I was so thankful for this family of faith, for my church and the people of faith in my life. Because I could have given over to fear, but that I was rooted in Christ. There was this team that I work with here. Oh, I'm so blessed by them. We stayed on mission for the eternal through everything. It was a tough year. I know that there have been some discouragements that were shared, and we all faced them. Man, there were tough decisions to make. There were pivots that had to happen, tough choices, but I'm so blessed and happy to work with Pastor Andy, to work with Pastor Sally, to work with Pastor Nathan. I knew no matter what we were facing, I could trust the outcome because I trust them. And I don't trust them because of the positions that they hold. I follow them for that reason. I don't trust them because of the pastors. I don't trust them for who they say they are. I trust them because of who they say Jesus Christ is. And we can be firmly rooted in that. And this church, through everything, stayed on mission for the kingdom, pursuing God's will, rooted in Jesus, oriented to the eternal. And join us. I mean, you guys are here now, and I'm so excited you're here today. Part of that mission. Keep coming back. Plug in. Get into one of our teams. Experience the blessing of seeing God work through your own hands. Join one of our Thrive groups. I was blessed to spend an evening with our Thrive group leaders on Friday. And there are amazing leaders who are ready to pour into your life and to help you grow deep and live strong with Jesus. Zacchaeus was a man, it turns out I had a lot to say about. Zacchaeus overcame the external. He chose the eternal. He was willing to risk humiliation. He was willing to mingle into crowds that rejected him and swallow his pride and climb a tree just for a chance to see Jesus. But he didn't just see. He was seen, redeemed into salvation by Jesus. And you guys, Jesus, when he met Zacchaeus, he was just 10 days away from death on a cross. He was just passing through Jericho on his way to Jerusalem, except we know now he had that appointment with Zacchaeus. His ministry was nearing an end. He would have known this. He had a lot on his mind, and he knew that what he had to do was difficult, but necessary to fulfill the promise of God to restore all of humanity. All of humanity was restored to himself, and yet he took the time to stop and save just one man on his way. What does that tell you about our Lord? What does that tell you about the importance of each individual person to God? And what does it tell you about how important you are to Jesus? Is there anything that you are holding on to more tightly with more determination than him? Anything you are finding greater comfort or worth or reassurance in than Jesus? Are you trapped in an addiction? Are you jealous with your time? Do other people's opinions matter too much? I mean, even if you think you're doing absolutely fine, there is no relationship strong enough, no bank account big enough. There's no job secure enough, no body that's whole enough, not enough likes on your post, not enough of anything in this world that you can find worth or safety or salvation in. It is all temporary. There is just one thing that was and is to come. That's Jesus. Jesus is eternal and always. And he is stopping for you right now. He's using me to stop you in your life and share his word with you. The question is, how are you going to respond to that? How will you walk out of here today? There was an amazing message on our Echo app, and I want to share with you. It speaks to this so clearly. I love what it says. How often have we listened to Pastor Andy give an inspired and anointed message and feel that God is speaking directly to us? How quickly do we take action to align with God's word, or do we simply allow life to dictate our decision and ignore the voice of the Almighty? What will you choose today? Will you choose to be driven by the external, to let the busyness of your life crowd out spending time with Jesus? Will you choose to hold on to the temporary, wrapping up all your joy and happiness and worth into things that ultimately won't last? Will you be like that rich young ruler who said, I get what you're saying, Jesus, but I just can't? Or will you choose to be like Zacchaeus, receiving Jesus with joy and excitement, exchanging the temporary riches of this world for eternal treasures in heaven? Maybe there's a shift that's happening to you eternally, like there was for Zacchaeus, to feel stuck in a past sin, past patterns of brokenness that you can't break free from. You think nobody really knows me. Nobody knows what's going on with me. Nobody can help. Turn to Jesus. He never met Zacchaeus in his whole life, and he looked up into the tree and he called him by name. He said, Zacchaeus, he knew him. He called him out of sin, out of his brokenness, out of his shame, into salvation. And he knows your name. He loves you with a love that is deeper than anything you've ever known. So will you choose to trust him with your life today? Let's pray. God, there is no small story in your word. I thank you so much for the story of Zacchaeus. Someone who taught us to go to extraordinary lengths to do whatever it takes to find you, to grasp hold of you, and to freely accept the salvation and grace that you give. If those are here, if there are people here today that are struggling with holding on to things that are temporary, that are elevating the external, God, I pray for them today. There would be an awakening in their heart that what you offer is 100 times greater than anything that they would have to give up by accepting you and following you and truly committing their life and rooting firmly in you. Jesus, I thank you for your blood. I thank you for the sacrifice, the glorious purpose that you fulfilled, that we can now be with you and be reconciled to God forever. God, I pray for this church. I pray for the people in it right now that we would go from this place with a spirit truly awakened to who you are and who Jesus is. And it's in his name that I pray. Amen.